everybody. First of all, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continued connection to these lands and waterways. We'll also acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for and protect our place and our people. I'll say welcome to everybody now, and I'll save me repeating it again at the when we start the actual council meeting properly, but thank you for coming along on a night that doesn't promise to be all that flash. I gather that it's raining on and off out there, but the forecast is talking about from time to time there might be up to 100 mils, which does sound like an awful lot of rain if that does materialise. Welcome to those members that are here today and those who have joined us by the webcast. And we now can declare the public forum open. And we're holding the public forum today to enable members of the community who have registered to speak on an item and to be able to present to council meeting tonight. So I do ask that people allow the public members to speak with respect. And also need to remind the speakers that what you're saying is going to be webcast, and that does mean that your image and what you say is broadcast live to the public, and it's also recorded. So just please be careful of what you say and avoid making statements that may defame or offend anybody. I know the script's already got up on the screen. Keep your phones off for the duration. And we'll just move on and check with the staff if there's any conflicts of interest there. I don't believe there are. Nope. So we can move on from that. And just remind the speakers that it's 3 minutes. And I know we all want to speak for longer periods of time. If I can keep you to the 3 minutes, I think you'll get a sort of a bell or a sign at 2 minutes 30. So just bear in mind you've got 30 seconds after that to finish up. So we've got 5 speakers tonight, and the leading one off, Kevin Brooks, is going to talk about financial sustainability strategy, item 2.5. Kevin, welcome.
This long-term financial plan shows that the Administrator and CEO's current management settings will deliver operating deficits in 8 of the next 10 years. Over 10 years, the cumulative net deficit in the consolidated account will be an eye-watering 360 million. The financial turnaround the Administrator and CEO boasted about is now exposed as spin rather than reality. The report lacks transparency, but from the raw data, it appears applications to IPAR are being planned for special rate variation rate hikes of 25 to 30% on top of inflation. It is financially irresponsible and contrary to the accounting conventions of conservatism and prudence to just make a groundless assumption in financial plans that these applications will be approved. Another special rate variation is totally unjustified. Council cannot argue the previous special variation rate hike was insufficient when Council got the exact amount and the exact 10-year timescale that it applied for. That extra money was only ever intended for short-term emergency purposes, such as repaying loans from the financial crisis. A financial crisis, let's not forget, the Administrator blamed on overspending by previous councillors. The recently departed CFO even testified to the public inquiry she would have responded to deficits by cutting expenditure. So how come, now facing a cumulative deficit of 360 million, none of the 4 options in tonight's report shaves more than 1.5% of consolidated operating expenditure, spiring towards $1 billion by 2033? Employee costs, that's the money our unelected bureaucracy spends on itself, will be 301 million by 2033, 85% more than in the Administrator's first budget in 2021-22. None of the 4 options in this report shaves $1 off that amount. What does that say about this council's commitment to productivity? The unaccountable bureaucracy once again protecting its own interests whilst inflicting rate hikes and service cuts on the community. And with no elected councillors to blame this time, Can you believe they are now blaming their best friend, IPART? CEO David Farmer has been touring media outlets fretting that IPART's rate peg doesn't match CPI inflation. He knows full well councils themselves lobbied IPART to base rate peg on a council-specific cost index rather than an economy-wide measure such as CPI. He even wrote to IPART himself supporting the council-based cost change index. So why is he now complaining? He certainly wasn't complaining between 2010 and 2020 when rate peg averaged 2.5% per year across New South Wales compared with CPI inflation of just 1.9%. The IPART system is far more generous to councils than it is to ratepayers. If this council can't balance its books after receiving a 30% increase in rates revenue in 3 years, then it has a management problem, not a revenue problem. Council doesn't need more rate hikes.
Sorry, I think Kevin, we just check. Kevin, just pause for a moment, please. Kevin, just pause for a moment. Our timer's not working. Well, I haven't got a timer. Oh, I thought the bell was 2.5, because the timer on here is not working. Yeah, you were going on at 2. Yeah, well, I think you've had your 3 minutes anyway, from what I can understand. So thank you, Kevin. Now we have Mark Ellis talking on item 2.6, the outcome of the community consultation, sell or retain Austin Butler access grant.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I'm here to speak in support of the recommendation in item 2.6, outcome of the community consultation on Austin Butler access land. It is to rescind the resolution 202/21/8 of 27th July 2021 and to reclassify part of Lot 9 DP 235385 Austin Butler Reserve from community land to operational land, and take no further action to progress the sale of the part Lot 9 DP 2385 known as Austin Butler Reserve Access. Mr. Administrator, you've always said you'll be guided by the community. Last year, you actually quoted them saying, as far as I'm concerned, the community decision is based on them. Also, during your administrative minute last meeting on the 26th of September, you again stated it's up to the community and indicated that the reclassification and sale would only proceed further if a clear majority was demonstrated in favour of the sale. Well, this report shows the community has spoken one more time and their answer has been a resounding no to the reclassification and sell off of this community land. The current consultation process has identified a majority to retain the land in council ownership, with the results of the open survey showing an overwhelming 92% of 2,000 respondents wanted to retain the trees in Austin Butler AC in council ownership. Many in the community have repeatedly said that planting more trees should not be linked to the destruction of mature trees. A key point to be taken from this whole exercise is that people value the trees and community green space and the many environmental and amenity values that this green infrastructure provides. The retention of this community land does not stop the landowner redeveloping the centre on their own land. With some imagination, they could increase the number of shops, car parking and footprint of Woolworths and even more some units on top to create some real benefit in the community. As the Wairau CBD has grown, the roads have changed. In 2006, the Peninsula Urban Direction Strategy highlighted that the increasing population would impact the existing infrastructure and traffic would become severely stressed and local roads would become gridlocked at peak times. Well, this has transpired and will be exacerbated further with the current Minister for Planning's call for further increases in housing, as alluded to in the item 2.11 of this meeting. There needs to be a holistic plan, a master plan for the peninsula that includes green infrastructure planning and a new transport master plan for the Wairau CBD that looks into increasing active transport options, arrive and go public transport, and a reconfiguration of the road network that can improve the traffic flow and address the constant traffic through Wairau to the Rip Bridge, which some in the community who are against the retention argue for. As stated in the council report, I quote, Ceasing the proposed sale process provides a clear demonstration of Council's respect for the views of the community that is entrusted to lead and serve. This links to the Community Strategic Plan Goal A that recognises our community spirit is our strength. This process...
Mark.
I'll give 1 minute? Oh, I've got 3 seconds. I've got 3 sentences.
Okay, you got 3 seconds.
This process has clearly demonstrated the strength of the community to aspire to something better, and through the last 3 years, many in the community have been resolute in fighting for it. We, the community, ask you, the people's representative on this council under administration, to support the recommendation and retain Austin Butler AC reserved for this and in future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is Joy Cooper on the same subject. Joy, welcome.
Here we are again. I've been registered to speak about your asset sell-off program since you were acting CEO in the late months of 2020. It's many, many months since you proclaimed in your role as administrator that the cash crisis of 2020 was well and truly over, and the council's finances has been restored to normal footing. Rather than stop selling our public land, you allowed the senior management to morph the asset sell-off program into a bulk reclassification. And there it was again, poor old Austin Butler AC, named after a local soccer player dedicated to the community as a public reserve. But wait, an influential individual who's been lobbying to have this property reclassified and sold to his clients, the owners of the Peninsula Plaza Shopping Centre since 2014, has your ear. Did you at any stage since December 2020 ask your staff for all the files relating to the history of this property? Such a scan of the factual history of the piece of land would have revealed that the community has been telling you consistently for the past 3 years it's flood-prone, unsuitable for reclassification. Instead of believing and siding with the community, in September you decided to go back to the drawing board for another round of community consultation. The results are mixed. Those who decided to make the effort to go online and complete a survey have voted resoundingly to keep this land. Those who were selected by Micromex and telephoned are split pretty evenly. This council's usual sloppy reporting makes it difficult for the community to believe the accuracy of the results. What's easy to understand is the staff recommendations. It states clearly and unequivocally that Austin Butler should not be reclassified, sold or developed. It clearly states no more action. I've attended every council meeting since you took up the position of administrator. Not once have you thought it necessary to declare a conflict of interest in relation to those asset sales. You did have a hands-on role in determining which assets to sell and to whom as acting CEO, did you not? Rarely have you thought it necessary to resolve contrary to the staff recommendations. You've made the occasional amendment, you've put forward an occasional administrator's minute, but you've rarely done anything other than endorse the recommendations of the staff. I hope for the sake of the community of the Woy Woy Peninsula, who have worked so hard to save these trees, that you were telling the truth when you said you would do what the community wanted in relation to the land. I sincerely hope you adhere to the staff recommendation and resolve that Austin Butler AC can remain in public hands.
Thank you, Joy. And our fourth speaker is Michael Campbell. Item 2.7, outcome of public exhibition of the Water and Sewer Community Engagement and Education Strategy. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hart. Yes, in the Water and Sewer Community Engagement and Education Strategy, there's one aspect, and that is on page 18 of the plan, Council Agenda, page 325. We go down to what we call, or they call, or the council calls, Master Plan Unconnected Properties Engagement Plan. This puts a shiver up our spine if you live in the rural areas. Educate and engage customers on the risks and funding approaches for unconnected properties on the Central Coast. This is some master plan, Mr. Administrator. Perhaps we are talking about a grand and unknown forward plan to supposedly spend billions of ratepayers' dollars on a breathtaking scheme to urbanise the rural regions of the Central Coast over the next years. Imagine if this hit the chamber of an elected council, of just how many months or years of debate would ensue. We come to the very first knowledge of this to the 7,500 rural property owners of the Central Coast at such a scheme when council drops a surprise survey based on this master plan. Today, in fact, publicly, it was supposed to have been publicly known on November 23rd, but today, 5 days later, it's dropped as a survey and finishes on the 14th. Suddenly, when you get to the question, quote, do you pay water or sewer rates to council, when obviously, unquote, when obviously rural owners don't, when they press the button, the prompt appears. Thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we are only looking to speak to those who could contribute to the water and sewage bills. So it goes back to, and then there's the early one in this plan is develop and adopt customer charter complaints, revise water and sewer connection plan, guides how we will communicate with our customers and community. That one is back in September. That's 2 months ago, so it hasn't worked so far. So what is all this about? Keep the rural community out of the equation for the moment while those not physically assaulted by such a scheme decide what they think. This magnificent scheme must be estimated to cost billions of dollars, etc. You know, the roads would be torn up, the trees along the side, and it's just it's a gigantic scheme that should not be left. Mr. Hart, this would only suit a future developer, say wishing to build an urban lots within a rural enclave and then have somebody else, or everybody else, pay for the water and sewer connection. That's the only thing you can see out of it. The forecasted plan would embellish that plan very well. The first question is, how much is council paying Woolcott's, the agency, for the cost of this furphy? Shelve this absurd survey and leave this all to a future council of freely elected people installed later next year to decide if ever this is desirable or in the public interest. In their own time frame, go back to page 18, the Customer Charter Edict of September, treat us all with respect and remove this grand plan from the strategy. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Michael. And our last speaker tonight is Gary Chestnut, speaking on item 2.8, the outcome of public exhibition Central Coast Section 7 of 12, Local Infrastructure Contribution Plan 2023. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hart, and also welcome to all the Central Coast Council staff. My name is Gary Chestnut, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Community Environmental Network regarding item 2.8, which is titled Outcome of Public Exhibition, Central Coast Section 7212. My request is that item 2.8 be deferred and that you, as the administrator, A, establish a review panel to specifically address the allocation of contribution funds for the Gosford City Centre, develop contribution plans towards Woy Ettalonga Minor Sandplain Street Tree Planning Program, expansion of the coastal open space system, railway pedestrian link from Hospital Precinct to the Northern City Precinct, pedestrian waterfront linkage investigation in Gosford City Centre. B, write to the Minister for Planning, and C, adjust all sums in the Civic Improvement Plan of 2007 against Consumer Price Index to represent costs in 2022, which are being transferred into the current Central Coast Section 7.2 plan. It is noted in the report that due to the amendment of the Environmental Planning Assessment Regulation, that the maximum percentage that Council can levy has been reduced from 4% to 1%. Council staff have adjusted the contribution for the Gosford City Centre to reflect that reduction. However, as illustrated in the following table, and I understand the community won't see the table, Council staff have transferred $18 million from public domain projects to special city projects. No explanation or community discussion has been provided about why this transfer has occurred. I'm at a complete loss to understand why funding transport access and management works, which is essential to the movement of traffic and people, loses $16.3 million in preference to the special projects. It appears that the perception that the special city projects is more about politics and looking good than about addressing the future needs of the community. I recommend the review panel should consider the allocation of the funding in the Gosford City Centre. The request to write to the Minister for Planning is because State Environmental Planning Policy Precincts Regional 2021, formerly known as State Environmental Planning Policy Gosford City Centre of 2018, removes any height and floor space ratios for buildings on area greater than 5,200 square metres. This means that the development standards within the Gosford City Centre are outside the normal development standards that exist across the entire state of New South Wales. The special development standards compound the development of infrastructure in the Gosford CBD and is reflective of the amount and suggesting that the 1% be higher for the Gosford City Centre. And in respect to item number C, I don't think it needs any explanation. It's self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That brings us to a close for the public forum for now, and just invite people back. The council meeting will start at 6:30 p.m. tonight, and we'll get into the agenda then. But in the meantime, if you want to disappear, you can always watch it on the internet. But we'll return shortly. once again. And again, we'll acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and play. We'll pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging and recognise their continuous connection to these lands and waterways. Also acknowledge our shared responsibility to care for and protect our place and our people. I will now declare the meeting open for the Council Ordinary Meeting Tuesday 28th of November 2023. So I'll now declare that open. And just a reminder to people up there that the meeting is being broadcast, so please don't shout things out that might defame or do anything. And just to note that filming and photography are not permitted in the chamber. So a very warm welcome to everybody up there and to those watching at home tonight. And the first thing I just wish to talk about is the Tourism Award. I want to extend a massive congratulations to Council's Marketing and Tourism team, who last week won the prestigious Gold Award in the Local Government Award for the Tourism category at the 2023 New South Wales Tourism Awards. And in doing so, I'm going to actually ask the Director of Community and Recreation Services, Mel Smith, just to provide a little bit more information. And I believe you've got a little short video that might better demonstrate why we won.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. The Central Coast has cemented its place as a leading New South Wales destination with the announcement that the region has taken home 3 Golden Awards in the 2023 New South Wales Tourism Awards held on the 8th of November. The 3 Central Coast Gold winners include Destination Central Coast, led by Council's Marketing and Tourism team, Gold winner in Local Government Award for Tourism category, Crown Plaza Terrigal, Gold winner in the Business Event Venues category, the Australian Reptile Park at Somersby, Gold winner in the Major Tourism Attractions category. Glenworth Valley Wilderness Adventures were also a finalist in the Take 3 for the Sea Award for Visitor Litter Prevention category. Take 3 for the Sea are a Long Jetty-based organisation. Recognition at a state level in these highly respected annual awards confirm that the Central Coast region is on an exciting trajectory of visitor economy growth. The local government category is open to all local government authorities and recognises excellence in tourism, planning, the provision of tourism facilities and services, marketing, event development and management, and the overall contribution made to the New South Wales tourism industry. Council's Marketing and Tourism team was formed under a new tourism management model adopted by Council in 2018 and revised in 2020. The Central Coast visitor economy is a major contributor to supporting the growth of the region, bringing in more than $1 billion in the last year alone, boosting local businesses as well as providing employment. According to the latest visitation numbers released in June 2023 by Destination New South Wales, the region received 5.9 million domestic visitors annually. Central Coast has also been awarded a finalist position in the Global Destinations Top 100 list for a 3rd year running. Central Coast is the only Australian destination in this year's global competition. Green Destinations Top 100 judges praised our region's 2023 winning Good Practice Story under the Destination Management category, titled A Destination of Eco Advocates with Whales, Alpacas and Wheels. The Central Coast's finalist story and the Global 2023 Top 100 list is now available on the Green Destinations website and is now nominated for the Green Destination Story Awards, due to be announced at the International Tourism Exchange in Berlin in March 2024. We'll just play the short video now. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Well, that was a nice little snapshot on what's been going on the coast, and you can see that the council was in with some pretty illustrious company there in terms of the awards. So again, heartiest congratulations to the council's marketing and tourism team. Earlier this month, I attended the Local Government New South Wales annual conference along with Mr. Farmer as the council CEO, and the conference saw a very, very high turnout of council representatives converging in Rosehill over in New South Wales, where councillors from all over the state debated and voted on key industry matters and observed presentations by MP, panellists and other speakers. And it's absolutely clear coming out of that conference that the key challenges for councils are largely consistent right across the state. In particular, the challenge to address increasing demand for services and infrastructure with diminishing and/or inconsistent financial resources to do so due to a variety of external pressures, including inflation, but also state government cost shifting, etc. And that was a primary takeaway from the conference. The ability for councils to keep pace with these external pressures and the financial impacts of lifts in service provision is proving increasingly difficult for councils. So during the conference, motions were presented for council delegates to cast their votes on, and I was particularly pleased to support a number of items, which happened to be items 3 and 5, which supported further investigation into financial sustainability of councils and to move to consider the state of local government assets and the emergency service levies. These are two key matters which have major impacts on councils' bottom lines and long-term financial sustainability. Changes to how these matters are dealt with will ultimately bring positive change for local government and ultimately for you, the community, going forward. IPART did presentations there, and of course they have finally acknowledged that their previous methodology did not meet the requirements of what councils do in the modern world, and it was not a particularly relevant number that they came up with, and they have agreed to change the way they're progressing, and I'm pleased to say that they have been, you could call it more generous, but they're actually being more realistic with the numbers they're talking about for the rate movement next year. The entrance north little turns are nesting, and it's great when you start to see them arrive in the entrance north, and council has reminded the community of how to help protect this endangered species. In partnership with the community, council has carried out a number of activities in recent years to help the little terns nesting, and these actions have resulted in record-breaking breeding success and significantly contributed to the long-term survival of the species. I do ask people to keep back from the fenced area at the entrance north during this important nesting period to help keep this area litter-free, to avoid unnecessary noise, including the flying of drones over the area, report any fox sightings in the area to council, and keep domestic pets away from the site. And I do again want to extend my thanks to the environmental staff in our council for their fantastic work on this particular project. North of Oka Paths project, I was out there recently having a look at that, and that's been completed. Now that delivers a safer network of footpaths for pedestrians between 3 busy streets in north of Oka running up from the beach. The new pathways will increase connectivity and accessibilities for locals and visitors, while the street drainage, new road pavement and curb and gutter infrastructure have improved critical infrastructure in the area. It was great to consult and work alongside the community on this project, which was made possible by a $4.3 million grant from the Australian government, while council contributed just over $1 million. Once again, the topic of domestic violence on the coast is coming to the fore, and again we're working with community leaders to initiate important discussions and conversation around domestic and family violence. The Central Coast consistently has one of the highest number of incidences of family and domestic violence compared to any other local government area. So the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, which runs every year from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, raising awareness and educating the community, is terribly important. Throughout the 16-day campaign, a number of activities have been organised to create awareness of this important issue, including Council's annual support of the Central Coast Domestic Violence Committee's Walk Against Domestic Violence, and I encourage everybody to take part in this important campaign, and you can get further details that's from the Council's website. Now, with Christmas only 4 weeks away, Council is starting to promote its Christmas events across the coast. You can expect to see carols events and Christmas decorations across our town centres in Gosford, Wyong, the Entrance and Toukley, with visits from Santa for the kids. So head to Council's website, again, so not to miss Santa and Christmas. And just a reminder, I'm very happy to meet with anybody who would like to talk to me about the return of councillors. So perhaps people might be thinking of running for an election or would like to know more. My office is always open. I'd be happy to meet with anyone interested in knowing more and help them as much as I can. And with that, I will finish my closing comments for tonight and we will begin to commence the formal part of the meeting. Item 1.1, which is disclosures of interest. If there is any staff here, could you raise your hand? But I don't believe there are any conflicts. So with that, we'll agree to resolve to adopt the resolution as displayed on the screen. Item 1.2, which is conf minutes of the previous meeting. I can confirm I was present at the last meeting, albeit I wasn't that well, but nonetheless we got through it. So I can accept that the resolution that is displayed on the screen is correct, and we'll confirm that. Item 1.3, notice of intention to deal with matters in confidential session. We have no matters to discuss in confidential session, so I'll now resolve to adopt the resolution that is displayed on the screen. Now, I do have one administrator's minute. I'm not going to read the whole minute out, but it will be up on the internet as part of this council meeting. But I do want to go through some particular components. It's something that came about from a meeting with residents from Glenning Valley, who asked to meet with me recently to discuss the significant and consistent negative impacts that an Airbnb property in their street is causing to their families, and indeed all of the neighbours on their street. The residents shared with me that their neighbour, who is a Sydney resident, owns and runs an unstaffed Airbnb property and specifically promotes the semi-rural property for no rules bucks nights and hens parties. The flow-on effects of this are all hours wild parties, extreme light, smoke and noise pollution, feelings of unsafety with disorderly and drunken individuals roaming the area at night, negative impacts on the nocturnal animals who habitat the area and more. The ongoing and relentless experience that these residents are going through has clearly caused great harm to the health and well-being of themselves and their neighbours, who I note have exhausted every avenue of negotiation with the Airbnb neighbour and also with Airbnb and Stays, the two platforms that run these sites. During this meeting, I committed to preparing some information on the current short-term residential accommodation permissibility and legislation in New South Wales, and am confident that a review of such legislation must occur to address these issues, which of course are not just isolated to the Glenning Valley region. There are a number of issues with the current short-term residential accommodation regulatory framework, including their potential impact to housing supply and the limited effectiveness of the current regulatory system. The New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment should review the current regulatory framework for short-term residential accommodation in New South Wales and consider the impact of short-term residential accommodation on housing affordability, the social impacts of short-term residential accommodation, such as antisocial behaviour and noise impacts on neighbours, whether the locations in which short-term residential accommodation and particularly non-hosted short-term residential accommodation are currently permitted are appropriate, and whether exempt development is the appropriate approval process. Also, whether non-hosted short-term residential accommodation would be better suited to higher density and employment zones and/or within areas with better proximity to higher amenity and key local infrastructure such as town centres, and whether the current regulatory regime, including the compliance enforcement activities, are appropriate. I have committed to write to the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading, the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, and to Local Government New South Wales to raise these matters and request that compliance issues be urgently addressed. I will also be requesting that a review of the regulatory framework to consider the impacts of short-term residential accommodation on housing affordability and housing market conducted. And for these reasons, I'm now going to resolve the following 4 resolutions that will appear on the screen. And now we'll move to item 2.1 and item 2.2, which are the monthly finance report for October 23 and the investment report for October 23. Mr. Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council continues to perform better than budget, as at the 31st of October, with a $7 million surplus being recorded for the consolidated entity for the month of October. This means that moves us to a $15.6 million surplus for the year to date. Importantly, this compares to a $10.8 million surplus for the same period last year. So year to date, this provides confidence that Council is on track to improve on the current forecast small surplus, and we'll discuss that a little bit later in the quarterly review. Wages and salaries remain as per budget, but material and services costs currently are being held lower than budget. Interest income is also up as higher interest rates and higher cash reserves take effect. This will come off as Council makes an early repayment of the balance of its $100 million emergency loan that was taken out in December 2020. However, that will also avoid significant higher interest costs should that loan have been rolled over. A general fund is performing strongly with $11.3 million surplus year to date. Water and sewer is showing a small surplus, slightly better than budgeted figures. The major performance ratios shown on page 17 of the agenda are all in the acceptable range as specified by the Office of Local Government and are shown in green in your paper. All Council's cash funds are positive, assuming drainage is wrapped into general fund, with there being a net $51 million in general fund. As at 31 October, there was $68.5 million in a reserve or restricted fund to go towards paying out in December the $82 million remaining in the $100 million emergency loan taken out during the height of the financial crisis in 2020. Importantly, Council's capital program, aided by good weather and better planning, is running slightly ahead of budget. Council's strengthening financial position allows us to bring some of these works forward and ultimately deliver these works to the benefit of the community earlier than planned. As of 31st of October, Council held $788 million in cash and investments invested in accordance with ministerial guidelines. The details are within the attachments, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Well, there's not much more I could add. After a third of the year, financial year gone, I've got to say we're in pretty good shape. And I think what I am looking forward most to is when we can actually repay that $100 million and get that off the books. And as the CEO said, it is freeing us up to be able to increase, hopefully, some of the service levels as we go forward. So I would like to note those. Also, the cash position is strong. We have more than enough sufficient working capital or unrestricted cash to keep us afloat at this point in time. So after a third of the year passed, we're in pretty good shape. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendations for item 2.1 and 2.2 and make those as a decision of Council. We now move to item 2.3, which is a formal requirement by the Office of Local Government, which is the Q1 review, and I think Dr. Alice Howe and Edward Hock are going to do a joint presentation on this.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council staff are pleased to present to Council the Q1 business report for this financial year, which provides a progress update on our delivery of the commitments made in the adopted operational plan. Of the 115 deliverables in this year's operational plan, 84% are either completed or on track. 17 deliverables are currently delayed and 1 is on hold. The delayed actions are primarily related to water and sewer activities, development assessment targets and coastal management programs. Highlights for the quarter include distribution of over $690,000 in grant funds for community projects, a 21% increase in attendance at the Gosford Regional Art Gallery, and delivery of 80 communication campaigns around council services, including the Harvest Festival, the Long Jetty Rocket Ship Playground and chemical clean-out. Council also commenced the first stage of its 18-month engagement project to update the Community Strategic Plan and Local Strategic Planning Statement and commence site preparation works at the new Gosford Regional Library. A number of amendments are proposed to the operational plan adopted in June. These include variation to 8 deliverables to address external factors and inclusion of an additional 12 deliverables to address emerging priorities. I'll hand over to Mr Hock to discuss Council's financial performance at the end of Q1.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. The first quarter review of Council's budget has identified a projected increase in operating income of $1.9 million. Adjustments include increased income from greater use of council facilities, more interest income derived from the higher interest rate environment, unbudgeted grant receipts, and increased income from energy certificates and Transport for New South Wales work orders. The increased income is partially offset by increased expenditure required to generate this income. Operational expenditure is projected to decrease by $900,000. The net adjustment reflects increases in budget requirements for utilities, expenditure associated with grants and other increased income, and reallocation of expenditure to capital. Based on these proposed budget changes, Council now projects a surplus of $5.6 million for the year ending 30 June 2024. An increase in capital expenditure of $13.5 million has been included, mainly relating to the receipt of unbudgeted grants. As at the 30th of September, Council had $777 million in cash and investments, sufficient unrestricted cash to meet operational requirements and adequate loan repayment coverage, unrestricted funds on a consolidated basis totaling $571 million, with the remaining $206 million being restricted for specific purposes. In General Fund, unrestricted cash is $64 million, and we're on track to make early repayment of the emergency loan in December 2023. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you for that. And it's just interesting that whilst that report's as of the end of September, through our financial reporting, you've already heard from the CEO how we're doing at the end of October. So there's not much more to add to the Q1 report. I have pointed out strongly to the Office of Local Government that to do a Q1 report sort of at the end of November, which is the first time that for a lot of councils that councillors and even senior staff see a set of numbers, I don't think it's good enough. I think the monthly reporting cycle should be adopted across the state because in terms of transparency, that tells you exactly what's going on a monthly basis, and you can see what the trends are and if something's going wrong. But when you're doing something 2 months after the event, so 5 months have passed before councillors will actually, or senior staff in the majority of councils will not see any financial numbers until they get that Q1 report. And if you fast forward and you think about the Q3 report, which is complete at the end of March 31, then that's not actually shown to councillors and or the community and or senior staff until towards the end of May, which gives precisely 30 days to adjust anything should the numbers have turned south or anything like that. So it is not a good system. I've made the point, I made it again to the Office of Local Government at the conference, and hopefully someday that'll actually pick up. But in the meantime, we're happy to adopt the recommendations that are shown on the screen to complete item 2.3. We'll move to item 2.4, which is the annual report for 22-23. We had the financials last council meeting. Now this is the actual words that go with it. Dr. Howe, it's your document.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. It's actually a document I think that most fingers in council have a role in terms of pulling it all together. So it does seek a resolution from council to adopt last year's annual report. Our annual report summarises activities undertaken by council over the 2022-23 financial year. It includes information about the Central Coast, performance of council as an organisation, specific legislative reporting requirements, and our audited financial statements, which we're very pleased to be able to deliver with the annual report this year. Last year, we completed or closed out just over 80% of our deliverables. 11 deliverables were multi-year actions and 19 or 12% were delayed or the target was not met. Examples of actions that did not meet expectations include the visitation at the Regional Gallery, which was still 14% below COVID levels last year, and the number of animals that were microchipped and desexed, which was below target. Multi-year projects that continue to be active include development of the Employment Land Strategy, the Airport Master Plan, and our Integrated Transport Strategy, all of which have been rescheduled for delivery this year. Some of the highlights from last year include processing of more development applications than any other council in New South Wales, over 600,000 visitors to the Love Central Coast Tourism website, contributing to our $1.3 billion visitor economy. Council repaired over 100,000 potholes and upgraded over 20 kilometres of sewer mains and renewed 5.5 kilometres of water mains. We delivered over 20,000 low-cost meals to over 50s through our leisure and learning centres and inspected 1,005 retail food businesses. We've supported responsible waste management with our chemical clean-out and illegal dumping programs, in addition to our curbside services, and recognised 43 outstanding young Central Coast residents through our Youth Week awards. Some of the other highlights you can read about in the annual report include our award-winning new landfill cell at Buttonderry Waste Management Facility, celebration of our 75 years of library services on the coast, which are well supported by the local community, with a 93% increase in attendance and a 9.4% increase in loans. Federal funding assisted us to upgrade play spaces at Killarney Vale, Saratoga, Mardi, East Gosford, Avoca Beach and Budgewoi last year. And our work with the New South Wales Government on improving our call centre experience has assisted us to introduce new call centre software along with our new phone number. This customer service focus across the organisation has almost doubled our customer responsiveness over the last 12 months. Again, I'll hand over to Mr Hock to discuss Council's financial results for the last year.
No, there's no financial results.
We
Okay, we
Back to
didn't
you
last,
then,
we
Mr.
didn't last,
Administrator.
we didn't, yeah, we didn't last week. Last month, actually, yeah. Yeah, well, that's good. So that's the words that go with it. Now, we did only hit 80%, sort of roughly around the target number. I think, one needs to just put that in to be relevant, I guess, compared to other councils. It varies, of course, because as some people in the audience will know, it largely depends on how hard you make the target as to whether you achieve it or not. The council here has generally set reasonably tough targets, and hence 80% against that is a reasonable outcome. But if you look around other councils, you will see that their general achievement of targets is often around that 80%. As I said, it's only too easy to put a soft target in there and get, if you like, the brownie points for achieving it. But nonetheless, the organisation is working pretty well now and it is moving its way forward. So I'm going to move the recommendation that adopts the annual report 2022 to 23 as a decision of council. Now we move on to the financial sustainability strategy. And I think, Mr Farmer, you're going to talk to this a little bit.
Yes, Mr Administrator, and this might be a reasonably long presentation, but it's important that we go through this and I guess explain where we've come from and where we're going to. If we go to the first slide, that slide shows council's operating position, performance. Below the line is deficit and above the line is surplus. And you can see in 18-19 we had a small deficit, but that was actually masked. There were a couple of one-off events that made that look better than it was. It was actually underlying that a significant deficit. Then in 1920 and 2021 we had huge deficits that add up in total to around $160 million accumulated deficits in those 2 years. And then in 21-22 we were able to rebound with a $40-odd million surplus. Now that's a $110 million net turnaround in between 2021 and 21-22. That was done with a range of fairly drastic actions, in perhaps the most drastic set of actions I've ever seen in a local authority in my time anywhere. That included a significant reduction in costs. Roughly 1 in 4 jobs in the organisation disappeared, and included significant reductions in budgeted materials and services, but also included a $22 million rate increase, which was about a fifth of that net turnaround. So it was about 20% of that net turnaround was driven by additional rates in that period. Last year we were able to maintain roughly that surplus at about $35 million, and that surplus is predicted to come back again a little bit as we begin to restore service levels across the organisation. We can go to the next slide. What those big deficits led to. And the important item on this slide is the grey bars, the small grey bars. They are your liquidity. That is the available cash you've got to run your business. The large bars are total cash and restricted cash. So the grey bar is the unrestricted cash, and that is essentially your working capital. And you can see in 1920, as a direct result of the massive deficit that was run, together with a largely unfunded capital program, we went towards close to $200 million of negative restricted funds. That's essentially trading insolvent. And that's, at that point in time, the council was suspended and then dismissed, and an administrator was put in place, and a range of actions were taken. You can see the last 2 years, we've moved into positive working funds, and so we're now in a stable position. In 2022-23, we're also starting to build up into a reserve cash to early repay the loans. If we go to the next slide, this is about debt, and we can see the big green line is our total debt, and some debt isn't bad. I was describing it a little bit like what's your mortgage on your house is sort of okay, but your credit card debt isn't. And the red debt, so essentially the orange and the blue debt, and the grey debt is essentially mortgage on your house, expenditures against debt against major assets, but the red debt is the emergency loans that we had to take out, starting with $150 million in 2021, in December and November 2021. That's slowly been paid down, and this year, in December, next month, we anticipate being able to pay out $82 million, which is the balance of $100 million of that $150 million. So that's where we are in terms of debt. So if you move on to the next slide. So essentially, we've moved from a recovery plan, a crisis action plan, moving into sustainability. And we want to make sure that we provide a council that continues to be able to provide services, can continue to maintain its assets in the standard which the community expects, and that doesn't get into a situation like this that I've just shown you. That situation was catastrophic. It had an incredibly adverse effect on the community in terms of, dramatic falls off in service, on the staff in the organisation, on relationships between council and its community, and we never ever want to go there in the future. And part of this process is to establish a long-term financial strategy that allows councils to sustainably deliver its services and never ever go back to the situation it was. So the strategy, if we go to the next slide, is we can see above it, the strategy is designed to ensure that we can reliably deliver our services into the future, maintain the standards of assets, and not have any price shocks to our customers. So if we go to the next slide, our challenges are our income in almost all cases is restricted by IPART. We've got increasing cost pressures, and we're in a very challenged right now, and probably for the next few years, significant issue in terms of resources in terms of staff resources. We're an incredibly competitive market in terms of employment at the moment, and you can see that. Cafes can't get staff, well, that goes through everywhere. We've got an ageing asset base, and significant parts of our asset base are not to the standard that our community would expect. And we also have, and this is the issue that the Administrator mentioned previously, we have an increasing, growing demand of community expectations. And there would not be a day go by where I don't see a letter from a member of the community asking for something that we're currently not doing. And without a doubt, that will be something that the incoming council will receive, is why can't we do this or we can't do that. So I had 2 meetings last week with, well-meaning, respectable community organisations that want something more that we currently aren't doing. And so we have to deal with that, either say no, or if we do say yes, how do you do that without going broke, or what do you cut to do those extra bits of work. So if we go over to the next slide, there's 3 foundations of financial sustainability: operating position, which is essentially profit and loss. What we want to do as a sustainable operating position is make a small surplus every year. Small sustainable surplus builds up your reserves to enable you to have one moderately bad year, And what we need to do to maintain that is just make sure that your expenditure doesn't grow any faster than your income. The next piece is cash. We need to make sure that our cash is in line, and ultimately the canary in the coal mine for this organisation in 2020 was its cash. It couldn't legally pay its staff, it couldn't legally pay its creditors. And so we need to make sure that not only are we in an operating position, but our cash is maintained. And a cash is a combination of your operating position and your net financing, so how much you're borrowing and how much you're repaying, and your capital program. So you have to balance all those things together. And then ultimately your debt. And linked to that is your assets, and local governments are unusual beasts. We turn over less than 10% of the replacement value of our assets. We are ultimately a passive asset organisation, be it a park, be it natural areas, be it beaches, be it roads, be it footpaths, be it drains. The majority of the services that the community gains from us is asset-based. So how we care for, maintain and ensure the safety and the functionality of our assets is absolutely critical. So if we go to the next slide. The next slide talks about the measures, and if you had a look at the monthly financial report, we're using the same measures here. These are the Office of Local Government standard measures. We currently meet all of those, and within the context of the long-term financial plan, we assess ourselves against those. So in terms of the guidance, next slide, thanks. In terms of the guidance on the plan, we were instructed by Office of Local Government that we have to model a number of scenarios, including a baseline scenario. That is, if nothing changes. So therefore, our scenario 1 is if we do not take any action, is the baseline model that's required. And that says that we actually lose 2 significant portions of income, $23.3 million in 26-27, which is when the drainage charge is removed. And the only way that we can maintain that is via a special rate variation, even though the natural effect is actually just moving that bill from your water rates to your general rate, your council rates. That will require a special rate variation to achieve and have to go through the IPART process and a range of community consultation, etc. And then in 2031-32, the 15%, or actually the 12% above rate cap comes off, and we lose $29.6 million ongoing in that space. So in terms of a baseline model, that's what we are required to model with us doing nothing. If we do nothing, that's what happened. So we then modelled a scenario 2, which is some actions within council's control. That's not requiring any other external agency or organisation to deal with it, which adds additional operating revenue and applies a productivity factor on a year-on-year basis, which reduces our costs a little bit on an ongoing basis. Now, scenario 3 is about maintaining our current income. It's not about a rate increase, it's about maintaining the same level of rates in real terms, rates and charges in real term as is currently being paid. Okay, so that is scenario 3. Not a rate increase, but it involves
Please keep quiet.
It involves maintaining the current levels of rates and the current levels of drainage charge, but receiving that drainage charge under the Local Government Act as opposed to the Water Management Act. And then scenario 4 identifies some of the themes that we're picking up through community consultation and through community interactions, in that we're getting constant feedback of people want higher levels of maintenance of our assets and higher standard of assets. This model, scenario 4, has an additional $10 million injected into asset maintenance on an ongoing basis over the life of the plan. So if we go to the scenarios, next slide, what we see is the base model scenario, which Mr. Brooks says is what is our, misleadingly suggests is our situation. It's not our situation. We will be taking action to address that. But if we do nothing, we will run significant deficits 3 years out on. Scenario 2 pulls that back a little bit. Scenario 3, which is the preferred scenario, which maintains our current level of income, doesn't ask for anything more in real terms, essentially keeps us with a balanced budget. Right in the out years, we start to go slightly negative, but it's within the tolerance, the margin of tolerances, and we can work on those small variations in the very out years. But importantly, it also maintains positive cash throughout that period. Scenario 4, which isn't a preferred scenario at this time, that might be something an additional council, a new council might want to consider, would require additional income to be able to fund significantly more asset maintenance going on. So our preferred scenario is scenario 3, maintenance of council's current income within the rate cut amount, and it shows that this council can continue to maintain its assets in its current state on an ongoing basis for the next 10 years without a need for an additional rate increase. And I just wanted to make that clear because that wasn't how it was portrayed by one of the speakers in the public forum. So we commend this financial strategy to you. Can I say that this is a living document? It will be updated at least once a year and it will respond to changes in the environment. So changes in interest rates, changes in wage rates, changes in the IPART methodology, a range of things. This is a living document, and of course, many of the changes are 3 or 4 or 5 years' time. But by developing a long-term financial plan, working to that plan, educating the community and the incoming council about the importance of sticking to a plan like this, we can avoid the catastrophe that struck this council 3 years ago and had a very, very serious effect on a lot of people.
Now, thank you, Mr. Farmer. I think that's a really good explanation of what the draft long-term financial strategy looks like and the reasons why it's there. I also just need to make it very clear, as the individual, along with Natalia Cowley, who's now the CEO up at Coffs Harbour, we were the people who put all this in place. So when I say what happened, that is what happened, not what some people have believed what happened. So again, not for the first time, I'm going to just briefly explain exactly what we had to do. The CEO has mentioned there were some pretty catastrophic actions required. The first thing is, as he's mentioned, we were $200 million approximately negative. We didn't have sufficient capital, working capital, to be able to pay the staff wages or to do any further works or extend any contract works. We were, and no other word for it, we were broke. The government did not want to back the council in the sense of providing the money. They said go to the banks. So Natalia and I went to the 4 banks. We are only allowed to deal with 4 banks. Our transactional banks, the 4 big ones, so we're only allowed to go to the 4 big banks. The transactional banking was handled by Westpac. They were not interested in providing any funds. The third day I was actually here, National Australia Bank, NAB, demanded we repay $103 million because, quote, an administrator had been appointed, which in the contractual agreement for the loan said if an administrator is appointed, the bank has the right to demand the money back. It left 2 other banks. One we got $50 million from, and the other one we managed to secure the 100. Now, what did we need to do that? You go along to a bank, if you're in a business, or even if you're as a homeowner, and if you can't demonstrate that you can pay the terms of the loan, they don't give you the money. It was exactly the same in this case. We had to demonstrate to the risk department of the major bank that we were capable of being solvent for 10 years. They required us to increase revenue, the rate increase. They required us to cut costs, we did. And they required us to reduce staff, which we did. IPART did not understand that. They thought, just as Mr. Brooks thinks, the money that was gained was to repay the debt within the 3 years. That was never the case, because if you think about it, no lender will lend to an organisation or to an individual if they cannot demonstrate they have the ability over a longer period of time to be able to repay longer term debt. So IPART made the mistake. That's why I went straight back to IPART to get the balance, because we had the warning straight from the major bank, you haven't got that, we won't be able to continue. I had to go back to IPART to get the extension out for 10 years. That's how it came about. That was the recovery program. That's why the bank lent to us. The other thing, of course, was we had to sell assets. And I'm happy to say that we won't be selling. So please, let me speak. Now, I also want to make some comments that came out of the local... Can we keep that person quiet, please? Or go? I don't mind which. Well, I prefer you leave then. The things that are other things I learnt at the conference, which are things that IPART has been grappling with in terms of the future of how they come about with their rate cap. The CEO mentioned that assets are increasing. Council gets approximately 80% of its funding comes from the rate structure. The other funding comes from grants, and a big chunk of that comes from what are called the FAG grants, the Financial Assistance Grants. They are the most important grants we get because they enable us to apply anywhere in the organisation. In other words, they're taken into our income side and they allow us to spend it on anything. Now, the Commonwealth, unfortunately, has been reducing that. So whilst inflation has been going up, the Commonwealth has been reducing the amount of money they give us through the FAG grants. Now, that was a constant stream of discontent at the conference as to about why that's happening. Also, the timing of it, which is a separate factor, is also very difficult. So the FAG grants, which are not tied to inflation, which is a big chunk of our income, does not get covered by the IPART rate peg. The second thing is that the use of our assets is increasing all the time. Use roads for an example. The potholes increase, the breakdowns, the road substrate breaks down. We need to spend more money on it because of the deterioration and so on. Inflation doesn't cover that. It covers the cost of one pothole going up by the rate of inflation, yes. But when you've got to do 10 potholes instead of one, of course, you've got to find the money. So these are things that the IPART rate peg does not take into consideration. This last thing that I'll mention, and there's a range of things that all came out at the conference, the last thing is you get an asset revaluation. Now, all councils are required to do that, to reval their assets, and I just can't remember off the top of my head, but what was the consequences of the last reval? About 30-odd million? I think it was about $30-odd million added to our expenditure line through the depreciation from a revaluation. IPART's thing does not cover that again. Now, it might do some of this in the future, but it certainly hasn't been doing it up to now. So I just have to correct, unfortunately, the comments that were made tonight, just so that it's clear and on the record exactly how things came about. The other things that have taken place, back in 2018, there was very little mention of the environment, and they wasn't used much as a cost centre within most councils. Environmental factors and costs now make up, on average across New South Wales councils, 15% of their expenditure. So these are the new things. As we've had biodiversity, all these other things thrust upon councils, we have to play and work for, unfortunately, not covered by the adjustment for inflation, as given by IPART. But, as I said, there's some good news there, is that IPART have been were asked to review it, and they have now, I think, finally understood that not all councils are the same. Councils are different, and they do have to think about it a little bit more clearly. So with that, I'm actually going to strongly support the staff's version. I think that is the best recommendation to go forward with scenario 3. It does put the council in a good shape. It doesn't put an impost onto the councillors or to the community in the near future, but ultimately, like all other councils have had to do, they have had to go through the process of increasing their revenue stream to match the increase in costs that have not been met by the rate cap. And if you want further evidence of that, go to the Grattan Institute and look at their data. So with that, I will pass those resolutions as shown on the screen. And we will now move to item 2.6, which has a lot of interest there tonight, and the outcome of community consultation, sell or retain Austin Butler access.
This report responds to Council's resolution of September this year for staff to engage with the community in relation to the proposed sale of part of Austin Butler Reserve. Council's been approached by the Peninsula Plaza Shopping Centre with a request to acquire around 4,000 square metres of Austin Butler Reserve, of which about half is currently vegetated, for the purposes of improving safety around the shopping centre's docking facilities. I note, Mr Administrator, that since the business paper was published, Peninsula Plaza Management has advised Council that it has withdrawn its offer for sale. Since Council's resolution of September, Council staff have undertaken using Council's Your Voice Our Coast consultation platform, as well as a random independent survey of 202 local residents. Both surveys asked respondents whether they would prefer to retain the site in council ownership or sell it with funds dedicated to a local greening program. The results of the independent survey are provided in attachment 1 and summarised in the report. I note there was a typographic error on page 57 of the business paper where the key results have been inadvertently transposed. The graph is correct, which shows that there was no clear majority either way, with 49% of residents favouring sale of the land. The open survey respondents, however, were very clear on the matter, favouring retention of land. The majority of these responses were from people in the vicinity of the peninsula. Council also received 32 letters, of which 78% were in favour of retaining the land. After finalisation of the business paper last week, Council also received the results of a survey of 670 local residents conducted by Peninsula Plaza, which found that 52% of respondents were in favour of sale of the land. The recommendation before you tonight, Mr Administrator, is to note the community feedback and your previous decision to rescind the 22nd of August resolution to note the progress of reclassification. Council staff also recommend that no further action be taken to progress a sale and that the resolution from July 2021 to progress reclassification also be rescinded. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the Council has conducted varied and pretty thorough community consultation in response to my minute tabled at the September 23 Council meeting. As the paper shows, and as Dr Howes explained, the two council-run surveys have shown varying results, which is to be expected given the different forms of consultation that were undertaken. On one hand, we did have that open poll survey of the community where 1,500 people responded, where a campaign group have successfully rallied and represented their views. On the other hand, we had an independently run, statistically relevant survey which collected the views of a more varied cross-section of the community. I certainly have heard loudly and clearly the perspective of those from the engaged campaign group to save the Austin Butler trees. However, it was critical that a best practice, independent, representative survey was also undertaken. This is to understand what the whole community feels about this site, not just those who are actively engaged. Interestingly, the results from this independent survey are much closer than the results of the open poll survey on Council's website. The sentiment from the independent survey shows a broader care for and interest in greening of the peninsula area. A very fine margin of only 3% shows the majority of respondents have said they would prefer the Austin Butler access site to be sold. What I do want to point out to this, it's an excellent example for future councillors to closely consider. Councillors and the governing body are by the Act required to make decisions on behalf of everybody. And councillors in the governing body are often campaigned on a single interest or specific matters, and it is critical that good councillors can identify when this is occurring. While having a group of people writing to you or campaigning on an issue can make it feel like you're hearing from the community, it is critical to understand how the balance of the community feel about this same issue and to remember that we have 350,000 residents on the Central Coast who you are also making this decision for. It is not just those people who have written to you. So as a councillor or a governing body here, that is imperative. As the Act speaks out, you are governing for everybody, not just the noisy minority. I must acknowledge that also the council received a late submission from a representative of the Peninsula Plaza, which provided a copy of another independent survey undertaken, unrelated to council, which was commissioned by the Peninsula Plaza owners. This survey shows differing results from the two council-run surveys, with the majority of respondents favouring a sale of the Austin Butler Access site and an investment of all proceeds into a greening program for the Peninsula area. I was pleased that the Peninsula Plaza owners undertook their own surveying and community engagement, as this was asked of them by council a very long time ago, to help understand the sentiment of the area and in particular how the shoppers of the area would feel about this matter. I must note again today that Council CEO was advised formally that the proponent from Peninsula Plaza has withdrawn their offer to purchase this land. However, there are still outstanding resolutions of Council that need to be completed, which are related to this process and require finalisation. Therefore, we have continuing with the consideration of this report. Despite some results showing preference to sell the site, it is my opinion that the majority of the community favour the retention of the site and council ownership. I said that from the outset I would be guided by the community, and for this primary reason, I now resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen, with an additional resolution added to note the receipting of the late submission, including survey results from representatives of Peninsula Plaza. I now wish to move the resolutions that are shown on the screen. And with that, we will move to item 2.7, which is outcome of public exhibition, water and sewer community engagement and education strategy. Mr. Loader.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council's targeted engagement with the community, improving your water and sewer services, has informed development of this draft strategy, which outlines how Council will engage, communicate, educate and continue to improve its services whilst building trust with customers in the community. It continues our focus of placing the customer at the centre of everything Council does to deliver on water and sewer needs now and into the future. Importantly, it also addresses IPART's recommendation for water and sewer to enhance its engagement with customers and the community. Council endorsed at its meeting on 26 September 2023 for the draft strategy to go on public exhibition for a period of 28 days. The exhibition period commenced on the 27th September and concluded on the 26th of October 2023. 7 submissions were received during the exhibition period, with none relating to the draft strategy nor warranting any changes. And just further, Mr. Administrator, I'll just address some of the comments made during the public forum. The master plan is a requirement of the Department of Planning and Environment Water and is part of their strategic planning assurance framework for local water utilities. This was previously known as the Integrated Water Cycle Management Plan. The first part of this work was the development of the Central Coast Water Security Plan, which outlines the actions required to ensure we have adequate bulk water supply options for our community until 2050. The second part of this work is the master plan, which is a review of our current treatment and network assets, also to determine the works required to service our population into the future. Part of this review will include an assessment of unserviced properties across the region, of which there are over 7,000. The survey that Council is currently running is the first of 2 surveys focused on unserviced properties. This one is targeted at our existing water and sewer customers, that are those who are currently connected to the water and or sewer networks. We want to inform our customers of benefits of potentially connecting some of these properties to the network and obtain their views around the different ways any works could be funded. The second survey will be targeted at unconnected properties and aims to test the preferences of those residents in relation to being connected to the water and or sewer network and their willingness to pay for such a scheme. This work is part of a broader and thorough engagement process that will ensure that our community's views are considered in our decision making. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Deloder. I think you've explained it pretty well. part of this is requirements from my part that we actually do this work. It's obviously good practice that we do have strategies to engage with and educate our community, particularly with water and sewer. And if we ever run into, which no doubt we will sometime in the future, run into water shortages, then education is clearly, a major component of how we can actually manage our water supplies into the future. So with that, I'm happy to endorse and adopt the water and sewer community engagement and education strategy as shown on the screen. Item 2.8 is the outcome of the public exhibition, Central Coast Section 712 Local Infrastructure Contribution Plan. Dr. Howe.
Thank you again, Mr. Administrator. The Section 712 Contributions Plan identifies how funds that will be collected from developers under Section 712 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act are proposed to be spent. At its July meeting of this year, Council resolved to exhibit the draft plan and foreshadowed that 3 existing contributions plans and a policy regarding exemptions for charities would be rescinded. During public exhibition, 8 submissions were received, including a submission from Mr. Chestnut that largely covered the matters he has raised tonight. These submissions raised issues relating to improvement to Council's playgrounds, parks and cycleways, requested consideration of additional exemptions, and sought clarification on proposed schedule of works and why certain works from previous plans weren't carried through to this plan. A summary of each submission and the staff response is provided in attachment 2 of the Council report. There are also some submissions relating to dogs and off-leash areas, which were provided to the relevant areas of Council dealing with those matters. In relation to Mr. Chestnut's concerns about the value of works in the contribution plan, the Civic Improvement Plan for the Gosford City Centre has approximately $250 million of unfunded projects indexed to September of this year. Council is unable to fund these projects based on the projected income of the Civic Improvement Plan, and therefore the projects have been reviewed and reduced through the preparation of this Section 712 plan being considered tonight. It's intended that this plan will be reviewed annually to ensure it's contemporary and that the funds collected can be expended rather than held in reserve. In relation to the amount of developer contributions collected for Gosford, we continue to investigate options for generating increased income in the Gosford City Centre through local infrastructure contributions to support the high infrastructure requirements in Gosford City Centre. This includes funds from the New South Wales Government's recently established Housing and Productivity Contribution, which may also be available to fund that infrastructure work. The priority projects for the Central Coast will be nominated through the Urban Development Program Committee, of which Council is a member. Council staff are also undertaking a review and consolidation of Council's local infrastructure contributions plans, which will include development of a new Section 711 plan for Gosford, which is aimed at funding particular priority projects. In response to those submissions, a number of changes to the plan before you tonight are proposed, as shown in Attachment 1. These amendments include inclusion of educational establishments as an exempt activity and inclusion of definitions for educational establishments, emergency services facilities and emergency services organisations to assist with the application of exemptions for these types of activities. The description of local centre upgrade works has been updated to remove cycleways, as these are included separately in the schedule of works. Gosford City Centre bushland and environmental conservation works has been added. I believe that was a recommendation from Mr. Chestnut. And the schedule of works has been otherwise updated to ensure alignment with Council's operational plan and budget for this financial year. A resolution is sought to adopt the final version with those amendments to address community input. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Look, I have to thoroughly agree with the idea of simplifying contribution plans. Also, having had experience in every council I think I've ever been associated with, the huge gap between what we have collected with what the intent is to try and achieve. And I guess we list in these plans massive things that want to be achieved, and the amount we collect never gets anywhere near it. And as has been clearly identified in all the discussion on the finances, no council is ever really in the position of being able to fund the gap between what the contributions plan with what the objectives are. So I think bringing it back to reality and making it achievable, I think is commendable, and certainly therefore I'm going to support the adoption of the Central Coast 712 Local Infrastructure Contribution Plan, and also to rescind the others that are listed there on the screen. So with that, we'll move those forward and we'll move to the next one, which is 2.9. Oh, we get a break. It's Mr. Bolgoff, Tuggerawong Stage 5 route option.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Administrator. I do have a slide presentation that will be coming on in a moment. Just by way of background, the Tuggerawong Pathway is part of the bike plan, which is a priority project which forms part of the Tuggerah Lakes Loop. Back in 2019, we did get strong community support through our extensive consultation process. We have completed stages 1 to 4, and this report obviously talks about stage 5, where we have got contribution funding for part of the project, and we've identified pending grants. We have made a submission under the Investing Out of Communities program, which is part of the Australian government program, and we're in the process of seeing the results of that. In relation to consultation, as mentioned, it was extensive. We had 111 surveys actually completed. Our social media hit over 4,000 people, and we did have drop-in sessions as well, where we had 34 people face-to-face, so that we could actually explain the information around the project. Part of the consultation also included social pinpointing, where we could get information, and our website received over 1,500 hits as well. Just in the next slide. So this is actually indicating parts of stages 1 to 4. Just like to acknowledge Jodie Davis from the Tuggerawong Pathway Committee has provided some of these photographs, which shows a fantastic location and some great work done by council's teams and contractors. This part of stage 1 to 4 is about 3 kilometres that we've already completed. Next slide, please. Just on the left, what we did put out to the community is which option was preferred. So we looked at 5 different options for stage 5. And just to the left there, option A, which is that big red bar, identifies that 87% of the community did identify that option A was their preferred option. Just on the right is a little bit of the analysis that we did back a few years ago, where the green line was the inland route, which was option C, which was what was considered the preferred route at that stage, because it was considerably less, but because we've got grant funding, that evens out the costs to bring the options A and option C, no cost, additional cost to council. So just next slide, please. Just in reviewing all the impacts, we've got some of the considerations on the left being the number of trees removed, slope stability, what the impacts on RAC and the flora and fauna is, heritage, what the land status is, because we had to consider that, as well as flooding and how we interface with the oval at Donsmall Oval. So there was extensive consultation undertaken with specialists in relation to flood planning, open space, some of the construction and geotechnical engineers, environmental specialists, as well as the Aboriginal Land Council and Crown Land. And what that meant that we could overcome the constraints through prudent engineering and designs with this specialist advice. And what that actually means as well is that the outcome is tending towards doing boardwalks in the area, the pathways that will follow existing tracks where possible, so it integrates into the landscape to have minimum impact. Just next slide, thank you. So how are we going to deliver this? The detailed design will happen for this financial year and into next financial year. we will be doing further consultation with that detailed design. So the design will go out to the community to get some feedback, and we're expecting construction to be undertaken in financial years 25, 26 and 26, 27. So as mentioned before, we do have the funds through the developer contributions, and we've got identified the $1.5 million pending grant. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Borgoff. Yes, when I went for a walk around that part much earlier on when the staff was recommending option C, which the latter part obviously went round the roads rather than round the actual foreshore, it was quite clear that the community felt very strongly about actually being able to go along the foreshore. And I have to say, when you see some of those shots, it is a spectacular part of the world. So I'm delighted, of course, that Emma McBride, the federal member for Dobell up there, came to the party with $1.5 million to plug the gap between option C and between option A. So delighted that we've been able to accept that one, and Mr. Borgoff's team will now be able to plan and get on with the job of putting a walkway all the way round. And I have to say, at the end of that, when all that's completed, I actually think there's a big chunk of boardwalk going to go in there, and I think that will actually rival the Terrigal boardwalk. Mr. Farmer, well, I know you live in that part of the world, so I think you'll have another massive boardwalk and another walking track up there, which I think will be every bit the rival of its southern neighbour. So with that, happy to move the resolution to support option A to move forward, as shown on the screen. And Mr. Borgoff, you have the next one, 210, which is the stabilisation of Wiseman's Ferry Road, that road that keeps breaking down on us.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yeah, this is in relation to a tender process. Just in the extreme weather events in 2022, we had extensive damage that was caused along sections of Wiseman's Ferry, including the 2 sections of road that are currently reduced to a single lane at the moment. Council have been successful in securing funds from Transport for New South Wales under the Essential Public Asset Restoration Program to undertake repair works for the areas along Wiseman's Ferry Road. Council developed designs and called for tenders. These tenders exceeded the funds identified, and we are seeking to decline to accept all tenders and negotiate an outcome with to negotiate an outcome that will necessitate minor reduction of the scope and potentially additional funds under the program from Transport for New South Wales. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yes, thank you. This is something that councils are legally able to do and do relatively regularly, I have to say. And it's simply because, like in this situation, you get someone who's setting the standards, you have a funder, and you need a result. And the problem is when you start to go to the tender process, because some of those are a little bit more detailed, then you end up with pricing that's over where you want to be. So if you can actually work together to come up with acceptable solutions at an affordable price that's available, then you can actually get to a solution that is reasonable and good value for the community and for the funder. So with that, I'm quite happy to agree to the separate negotiation with the players and maybe anyone new comes into the frame to help fix up that road. Getting that road fixed up is going to be a major issue for those people at Spencer and Wiseman's Ferry who transit across those roads frequently. You've got down to one lane in areas where you've got traffic coming the other way. It's a hell of a hold up. So it'll be great if we can actually get this sorted out and get the transport solutions in and out of that part of the world solved. So with that, I'm happy to accept the recommendation from staff, and we'll move on to the next one, which is, Dr. Howe, you're getting to work out tonight. That's the housing on the Central Coast. We've had that letter from the Minister, and he asked for it to go on the council papers, and here it is, and we're going to respond to it at some stage.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces has written to all New South Wales councils asking them to review their local planning policy settings to support additional housing supply. And the Minister has asked that that formally be tabled at council, so council is aware of the request. Central Coast Council has recently undertaken that review as part of the development of the draft Central Coast Local Housing Strategy, which will soon be reported back to Council, seeking a resolution to adopt it. The draft housing strategy identifies 10 key housing challenges for the Central Coast. These challenges relate to the pressure population growth is placing on the local housing market, the lack of diversity in that market, particularly for affordable housing, accommodation suitable for older people and people with disability, and smaller houses, as well as the environment of the Central Coast, which constrains greenfield development, presents significant natural disaster hazards, and is highly valued by our community. The Minister has today also announced proposed changes to the planning framework to support accelerated housing delivery. Once those changes are released for public exhibition, Council staff intend to draft a submission on them, seeking to ensure that those much needed planning reforms are effective in our local context. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. And as we move to the resolutions, you'll see that Resolution D has been added, they've been renumbered, and D has been put in there. So the intention is to respond to the Minister once we've got the detail. Staff have had a chance to analyse it, and we can put our point of view back to the Minister of how we feel about these things. Again, something at the conference, it was widely discussed. Of course, there were government spokespeople there talking about what the Minister wanted to do with housing, etc. But the big cry from local government was, just very simply, put the infrastructure in before you put the houses in. Now, I don't know that that message was well received in the sense that I don't think it's occurring like that, particularly since the directives have already coming out from the Minister, and we haven't received any upgrades on infrastructure. And in fact, I think the state government removed, or Commonwealth removed, one of our local big pieces of infrastructure from their budget earlier this month or last month. I can't remember which month it was in. Was it last month? Last month it was, they removed it in the budget. So they've taken money out for the infrastructure that's required if you're going to put more people in housing here. So, look, obviously I'll support this going forward, but I look forward to our submission, which will come to Council hopefully next on with the housing strategy, which will be 12th of December, the next Council meeting. So with that, we'll pass those resolutions as shown on the screen now and move to 212, which is, again, Dr. Howe, who I think is actually going to address 5 papers in a row here because they're all papers that are going out for exhibition, and it makes sense to sort of, there's not a lot you can say. The public are going to have their chance to have these sale on, but you'll just briefly introduce the 5 options of papers that are going out for consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, we do have 5 draft documents for community input. The draft documents are firstly a nighttime economy discussion paper which proposes a strategic framework and an action plan for the development of the nighttime economy across all towns on the Central Coast, with a specific focus on Gosford as the Central Coast capital city. That's proposed to be exhibited for not less than 28 days. We're also proposing to exhibit a local approvals policy which identifies certain activities on council land that either do not need approval from council or can be dealt with under Section 68 of the Local Government Act rather than requiring a DA. An example of an exempt activity would be the use of most council parks by a group of less than 80 people for less than 3 hours, whereas use by a larger group would require approval from council, but not a DA if there's a local approvals policy in place. We propose to exhibit that document for not less than 42 days. One of the activities that's covered by the proposed local approvals policy is outdoor dining. To inform assessment of applications to use the public domain for that purpose, we have drafted outdoor dining specifications. These specifications seek to improve the look and feel of outdoor dining spaces across the LGA and ensure that they enhance the public domain and are sympathetic to other users of that public space, particularly pedestrians. Those specifications are also proposed to be exhibited concurrently with the local approvals policy for not less than 42 days. The 4th document is a draft regulatory policy which provides guidance on how council's compliance functions are undertaken and seeks to supersede the current policy for compliance and enforcement. If adopted following exhibition, staff recommend that a number of other policies be rescinded as outlined in the report. and this one is proposed to be exhibited for not less than 28 days. And last but certainly not least, staff have drafted a thematic history of the Central Coast, which describes the key themes that have underpinned the evolution of the Central Coast from its initial occupation by First Nations people. It's proposed to exhibit that document for not less than 28 days as well, Mr. Administrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. I think my comments on this is, all of this is designed to make life easier. We're trying to simplify it and less bureaucratic. So being able to, for example, to have, some of the regulatory stuff handled by a CEO as a decision-making rather than council, or some of the DAs, some of these things being exempt, activities being exempt rather than have to go through a DA process. This will just make life a lot quicker and a lot easier for most people out there. It'll also make it easier for staff, being blunt, not having to consider some of these things and be, always often on the back foot when for what is at the moment, a relatively minor activity on a park requiring a DA and having to go through all the hoops and hurdles that you have to do just to have, half a dozen people running around on a park, for example. So there is difficulties in this current system. So I simply applaud the council for bringing these papers up to here. Let them get out for exhibition. Let people have a chance to say. Some of them just take note that some of them are 42 days, some of them for 28 days. But there are some exciting things there. The dining situation, that's great. Some of these things are really likely to help dramatically how we improve our lifestyle here and just make life that bit easier. So fully endorse what's going ahead here. And with that, I'm just going to move all the recommendations on Globo, if you like, from 2012 through to and inclusive of 2015 and 16, in fact it is, inclusive 2016. So I'll move all of those on Globo. And we now come to something quite different, which is eliminating weed from a pond. A nice simple thing for a change. Dr. Howe.
Thank you. Last you'll hear from me tonight, Mr. Administrator. On the 23rd of November 2021, Council resolved to authorise staff to undertake weed management activities at Springfield Pond on Clarence Road, Springfield. This work was to control salvinia, which is a weed of national significance, and other aquatic weeds on the pond. It was funded by a $125,000 grant from the New South Wales Government Stronger Communities Fund. A total of $4,592 of council funding was also spent. Springfield Pond is the reason we're bringing it here tonight. It's partly owned by council and partly in private ownership, as shown on the slide, where the yellow divider is the boundary between the private and the public ownership. As it's not effective to treat only the public part of the pond, about 1/3 of the funding has been spent on private land. This expenditure is considered to provide public benefit primarily by improving the effectiveness of weed control on public land. However, it does require a council resolution with respect to that decision. That's not a decision that staff can make. So the report seeks council support not to charge the private landowner for the 1/3 of council's expenditure, which is around $1,500, due to the public benefit that expenditure has generated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Howe. It's hard to actually argue when the funding we received pretty much covered treatment for the whole area. So I think it would be a little remiss of council to actually charge the private owner for work that we've done as a public benefit when we'll be profiting out of the deal. So I don't feel inclined to do that. I just hope that the public the private ownership does continue to monitor and does continue to actually treat salvinia as it reappears, as it no doubt will, as we won't have got every single last spore out of the way, I would imagine, but maybe we have. But let's hope that we have managed to knock it pretty much on the head, because it's a very, very invasive weed in the waterways, and as Dr. Howe said, it's a problem right across Australia. So with that, I will support the recommendations from staff and approve those as a decision of council. And now we move on to some of our kind of more traditional ones that come towards the end of a council meeting. The Community Support Grant Program for September, and we have the recommendation in front of us to recommend providing some grants to the University of Newcastle, Coast Next Generation Art Exhibition, the Cristani Scholarships Limited Twilight Soiree, and Community Environment Network, the World Wetlands Day Breakfast, and the Berkeley Vale Neighbourhood Centre Association Rent Subsidy, and the Moonee Chero Progress Association Incorporated, the River Hub Community Activities. So all of those have benefited to some extent from the program, and there's a number there that actually missed out because for various reasons which are explained in the paper. But delighted to be able to allocate that money to those particular programs as shown in the resolution and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.19 is the Chain Valley Colliery Delta Coal Community Funding Grant Program. I think this occurs just once a year, isn't it, from memory? Yeah, it is only once a year. And it comes from the old agreement that took place way back, a voluntary planning agreement with the Delta Coal Company, which was put in place. So that there's a small percentage every year is made available through a trust process to actually be given out as grants to the local people in the valley area. So the amount of money is based on a formula, and I think we had approximately, if I can read the paper right, we actually had about $66,000 available, and we've been able to allocate some 64,344 of it. The panel is made up of people from the Delta Coal, also from the community and also from staff. So there's some good, well-worthy recipients there. The Mannering Park Community Garden Incorporated, Mannering Park Amateur Sailing Club, Mannering Park Community Garden Incorporated Garden Shed and Slab, and the Chain Valley Bay Progress Association Incorporated Shade Sales, Gwendolyn Summerland Point Rural Fire Brigade, and the Lions Club of Gwendolyn Incorporating Barbecue Equipment. So little grant programs that go there to help a lot of those volunteer groups actually, have a better day. So great to be able to allocate that out and to be able to make that as a decision of council to enable that money to flow. Item 2.2 is the Facade Improvement Program. Another program where we collect, item 220, which it's a program whereby we collect, collect a sort of a levy, if you like, from Gosford, Wyong, the entrance, Terrigal, Woy Woy and Toukley, from the businesses there, which then goes sort of kind of back to them in programs like this. So the facade program is a program such as the levy goes towards. It goes to other things like events and so on and so forth. But in terms of the facade program, the budget's about $150,000, and this recommendation here is to spend $79,000. So there's a big list there. I won't read them out, but they're all premises that will benefit. They have to, I think, invest as well, but they will get the benefit of that money too. And by improving the look of a place and the feel of a place, it does make it more attractive for people to be there. It actually makes places safer if more people are there. So it all has a self-fulfilling prospect down the track. So I think it's, again, a great program. And, the businesses are getting the money back, albeit in a slightly different format. So with that, I shall support the allocation of the $79,000 to the premises as listed in the resolutions. Item 2.21 is the minutes of the advisory group meetings and committee meetings were held in August, and there were meetings held in that period of time. There were no resolutions from those meetings for council to consider, so all we are doing at this point in time is noting the minutes of those advisory group meetings, which were the Heritage and Cultural Advisory Committee, the Catchment to Coast Committee, the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, and Water Management Advisory Committee, and the Aboriginal Advisory Committee extraordinary meeting, which was held on the 20th of October. And with that, I'm going to ask that Council approves noting of those minutes. And we'll go to the last item, which is item 2.22, the minutes of the Aboriginal Advisory Committee meeting held on the 3rd of October and changes to the terms of reference. Now, originally the terms of reference set up that a mayor or councillor was to chair this committee. I disagreed with that, and I had a conversation with Darkinjung, and they agreed to put it to the committee, and they talked to the committee about proposing that a member of the committee be appointed as the chairperson, and also a deputy chairperson to be appointed from the committee as well. So the recommendation is that they will be selected biennially by the committee in December by nomination, and a decision will be made on a show of hands. I believe when you're getting advice from a committee like this, it is not appropriate for a councillor or the mayor to chair it. I think it is appropriate that a member from the committee, in other words, from the Aboriginal Advisory Committee, actually does the chairing and so on. Because at the end of the day, they are an advisory committee to council, but they can put recommendations forward to committee, which council then considers. So again, it's not a place for, you know, a mayor or the chair to be a councillor on that committee. So with that, I am going to move and accept the recommendation from that committee to the council, and that is then noted in both the minutes and that we are adopting the amended terms of reference for the Aboriginal Advisory Committee. So with that, we have completed this rather long agenda tonight, and at 8:03 p.m. I'm going to close the meeting. I'm going to have a cup of tea. My voice is nearly gone. Anyone's welcome to have one with me up there. We might find a biscuit, might we, Ed, I think? Can we? Well, sure, we can find some biscuits. So anyway, hopefully see you up the top.